and welcome to our next Profile in Excellence. If you've been following along with Homeland Security Today, you know that the Homeland Security Today 2020 award winners, they didn't get a wonderful event and dinner to honor them. And so what we're doing is something I think perhaps even better. We're introducing them to our community and talking about why they won, why they were selected, and of course, the wonderful things they're doing in support of our Homeland Security. So I'm Christina Tanaschuk, Executive Editor of Homeland Security Today, and I'm very, very honored to be with Dr. Lori Moore-Merrell today. She is truly an extraordinary asset for our nation. And I got the chance to talk with her just a little bit before this, and her energy and her enthusiasm for firefighter data, very exciting stuff, but it is really instrumental. And we're really glad to have you here with us, Doctor.
Well, Christina, thank you so much. It's quite an honor to be able to be in this venue, and I'm thrilled to be able to have the opportunity to talk with you today.
Thank you. I just wanted to share with our audience a little bit about your history, because you really started as a firefighter paramedic. So you have been, boots on the ground, helping people in Memphis, and you've had a commitment to your community throughout your career. I mean, the nomination was exemplary. We're so excited to find people like you, because the ways that the public or our young people or our next generation can support Homeland Security are so varied. And I think you're just an example of that, not only a woman in STEM, but the founder of the International Public Safety Data Institute at the International Association of Firefighters. So that is an incredible task. That's an incredible experience that you're having. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about just your journey to starting it, because you were at IAFF for a long time before starting the Institute. So what kind of prompted it and what made you do it?
Yes, that's exactly right. So I did start as a firefighter medic in Memphis, Tennessee, back in the late 80s. Right. And so I was recruited in the early 90s to become an emergency medical services specialist with the International Association of Firefighters. That built over time. That was at a time when we were really focusing on fire-based EMS, right? Firefighters providing this emergency medical services, which they had done for many, many years prior, but this became the focus. In the early 90s, it really began to take off because we saw just an acceleration of emergency medical needs. And that's when we were having, the 911 growth and all of this new access to these new resources. And so from that grew into a research sort of opportunity at the IAFF, where we began to look at operational resources and response. In other words, how well do resources deployed from a fire department match the needs or the risk in a particular community? And no one had really ever thought about looking at those two things. But one of the things that we know is that if we do not match resources deployed from emergency response purposes, well, then we are much more vulnerable at our local community level to civilian injury and death, firefighter injury and death, and property loss. And so this has even continued to change as our society changes, and we have more high risk, high threat environments into which firefighters are responding with our law enforcement partners. And so we really began to have a look at that. And the research then caused data collection. And as you and I were joking prior, data is not always a sexy topic, right? But it is becoming more so. And it's not really the data themselves. It is more of the intelligence or the knowledge we get from the data. But if we don't do data collection or capture well, then we can't really mine it for that intelligence. And so that's where we began to focus at the IFF and saying, how do we better get data capture? How do we use technology that is available today to do that so that we can take firefighters really out of the data entry business, because first of all, they're not very good at it. And so we want to have better quality information, that
They're
we
busy fighting fires.
exactly. They do what they do best. And so we began to develop this research effort. And out of that, after 26 years at the IFF, I had the opportunity to retire and to stand up, thanks to the IFF and our other partner organizations, the International Public Safety Data Institute. And so at the Institute, our main mission is making sure that local governments, local fire departments, emergency responders have the data they need for operational decision-making, for, again, matching resources deployed to the risk environment in which they respond. So we want them to have that match well. We want them to have that information so they're not doing trial and error, which we have seen sometimes, or staying with the traditional, we've always done it this way, because that is not appropriate today when we have such informational resources available to us. So that's where we sort of live in that kind of environment.
So when did you start the Institute?
So the Institute is just now going on about 3 years old. We started it, we actually licensed it, stood it up as a nonprofit in the state of Virginia in 2018. We actually didn't go live with our full operations until April of 2019. So again, coming up on just about 2.5, almost 3 years old. And it is a collaboration of national fire organizations, including the IFF, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs, who have been a major partner with us, UL, NIST, who I suspect many are familiar with, in the Department of Commerce. Also, Urban Institute has been a major player with us for many years. So our research team at the Institute has, even though the Institute's only about 3 years old, our team has been together going on 18 years because our research has spanned that time frame, from everything from field experiments, looking at what I described to you as matching resources to risk, looking at crew size. How many firefighters do you need on a fire truck? How many do you need to respond and assemble as a team, given the risk environment? Is it a residential fire or is it a high-rise fire? And those resources differ. Now looking at, again, the threat environment. So responding to active shooter events with our law enforcement partners. What is the appropriate resource to commit to that type response? And so what we call in that environment an effective response force, right? How do we create that, and how do we know that it is an appropriate response force for that risk environment at the moment? Because if we match well, then we are much less vulnerable to those negative outcomes that I mentioned, from civilian injury and death, firefighter injury and death, property loss. And so it is, it's imperative that we have local communities assess their risk, plan their resources accordingly, and budget to the plan. Don't plan to your budget. And that is absolutely key at the local level. So our research team, as I said, been together for a very long time, and it was sort of an outgrowth of our work that established the new institute.
That's excellent. So we have seen quite an increase in some of the forest fires and some of the fires around the country. How has your Data Institute contributed to those responses, or how has it helped?
That's a great question. So yes, with climate change and all of the discussion today, looking at certainly the span of wildland fires, not only are they more frequent, but the area covered is much larger. And so being able to gather information early in those types of events is key to us understanding them, because often we have historically looked at a wildland fire as just wildland, and that's a certain response type. But with these fires occurring in what we call the wildland urban interface, right, or WUI, W-U-I, we call it, it helps us to understand that these are not just wildland. We're not just burning vegetation. These are structural environments as well. And so this interface has caused us to understand that we have to deploy not just wildland resources, but often dually trained structural firefighters with the wildland credential, right? And so understanding how these fires burn and how they are different from a structural fire, how they burn much faster, much hotter based on their fuel loads, and how they spread is even more key. So we have been very involved in trying to collect all of that type of information, working with our partners at NIST, working with others in the industry to better understand, because these fires are different and we must plan. We also need to be able to gather intelligence in the midst of the fire. In other words, having unmanned aerial devices, or others may call them drones, having capability, technology capability for data gathering during the event. Not only for that situational awareness for the incident commander and for the responders themselves, but for evacuation routes, for all of those things that we need in the moment, and then being able to assess them after the fact is also key.
Absolutely. So when you were looking at kind of starting the Institute, did you engage a lot of the firefighters on the ground to get kind of their input? We've worked a lot with DHS Science and Technology Directorate, and we know that it's always been a challenge to kind of get the scientists and the frontline folks together to really understand how we're going to collect this data, and if you're going to get cooperation, and whether it's going to be used in the end. So how did you do that when you were standing up the Institute?
That's a great question. All of the above. So what we did is to start with our fire service partners, because we needed them to understand the need. They all knew it, but a lot of the leadership, although you have the knowledge, you don't often know what you don't know. In other words, you can't always put in words what you know. And so as researchers, we helped with that translation. So we actually started with field personnel long before we brought in scientists. And so looking at that need and trying to understand it in the responder mindset, and then moving them to understand, how do I better use knowledge? And at the outset, a lot of the research that has been conducted for years, and we thought we were doing so well, but we ended up writing papers, getting peer-reviewed journal articles, forming, creating videos, and they sat on a shelf. So if you cannot translate research and data to practice, then it's worthless. And so we really had to make sure that we kept responders in our framework so that we were doing this translation appropriately. So it's not always about the data and the research and having the information. It's about sharing it and making it actionable at the local level. And that's really where our mission resides, is making sure that translation happens.
You are one of my new heroes. I believe so strongly in that. And when we bought Homeland Security Today, one of my big missions was making sure that the front lines had access to not only, information from the government, but also information from researchers who were researching terrorism and translating. I mean, no one's going to read one of those research papers. I mean,
exactly.
Honestly, even the smart people don't want to read those. So if you can make that accessible, it's so important for everyone to understand that there are a group of people who are researching and finding out the latest information. So sharing that's been a big part of our mission too. So in your nomination, they talked a lot about how you have really been an advocate for using data, and that you paved the way for educating agencies, even within DHS and everywhere, on how to plan for emergency incidents and implement data-driven decisions in real time. So talk to us about your passion for that and where that came from, because not everybody wakes up with a passion for data and sharing it.
Well, I tell you, and that's a very true statement. Data is something that we're only now as a society beginning to understand. And that's because we're amassing so much of it every single second. And so having access to data, and it's almost like we can't even communicate today without our technology and without our data information and being able to share information. And so data certainly is all around us. One of the things that we realized early on is that need is going to drive having this additional information, right? So what was the need? Where did we have questions that could not be answered? Because you have a lot of, first responder agencies that want to measure things. Well, it's all nice to say, I want to know that answer. But if you can't get the data to advise that answer, then forget it. That question will go unanswered. And so it was really a need driven, impetus that caused us to start this data hunger within the fire service. Then in 2005, over at DHS with the Assistance to Firefighters grants, there was a movement to look and move to research and funding research in that grant program. And so the very first research agenda under the FEMA Assistance to Firefighters grants came to be. And that first meeting occurred. And it's when we began to say, what's missing here? What can we not answer? What can we not advise? And that really has led the way. So having been at that first meeting, and then every 5 years, this research agenda planning takes place within the FEMA Grants Directorate. And it is so important because that is what drives the research in the fire service. And it's what has helped us to move forward as an institute, being primarily grant funded. Now, what has happened in that transition is that we started with saying, here's our questions. And now, even this week, this research agenda meeting is going on virtually. But here's how far we've come in 5-year increments. And now data is no longer a separate track or topic that we discuss. Data is discussed throughout all topics, right? So it moved from a topic that we needed to talk about because we didn't have any, or we didn't know how to use what we had, or it was not of a quality that could be used, to today, data completely permeates every subject matter, whether it is health and safety, operations, whatever it may be. What data do we have to inform that? And if we don't have it, where do we go and get it? So I think that progression has been monumental.
Absolutely. The other thing is that data really helps to make informed and very well reasoned decisions.
Yes.
So how do you combat the people who are like, well, look at Texas, it's snowing and they don't have enough plows. Your data didn't predict that. There are always outliers. And so the data allows you to look at history and plan exceptionally well. But there are always those times when it doesn't quite work out. So how do you respond to those critics?
So one of the things that I would say is that they are a little misinformed in that having that full picture. So yes, trend analysis gives us a lot of information. And often those trends can predict, if we have the appropriate models, we can do predictive analysis for what may occur in the future. But some of the other clues that were there that are missed, because often people want to look at one source of data, right? And this is your trend. What's happened in the weather in Texas for the last 100 years, right? One data source. What they fail to do, and this is in all venues, I'm using this as an example, but look at multiple data sources. Never will one data source give you all the intelligence you need. So we have to mine. We've got to layer, and then we've got to mine the data. And I'll go back to the fire service, and that for years, you can ask any fire department in the country, how fast, what's your data? Tell us your report. They will always tell you how many calls they made and how fast they get there. And on occasion, what type of calls they were, whether fire, EMS. That's been our resources, right? That's been what we've reported. That's no longer appropriate. We need geospatial data. We need community demographic data. I need the built environment data. I need hazard coding on that environment data. And I need historic response. I need weather. And when I can couple all of those things and mine them for intelligence, now I'm on to something, right? And that's what I think, and go back to the Texas example, that's what I think they missed. They were looking at one data source, maybe a couple, but they missed all these other data opportunities to layer them and mine them for the real intelligence and then be able to plan accordingly.
You must drive them crazy. Well, I think also there has to be kind of a note of realism that there will be those outliers, and you don't buy thousands of snowplows because of 3 days every 10 years. So there's
Right.
that. But with fire is a different situation where it really is destroying, people's lives. It's destroying people's homes. It's a much more urgent and devastating thing than, a
Yes.
snowfall that keeps you playing with your kids in the snow for a few days. So yeah, we get that. So one of the things, of course, that's coming up in data that I'm sure you're familiar with, but we'd love to learn a little bit more about what the Institute is doing, is artificial intelligence. So a lot of companies, of course, are cropping up that are able to use artificial intelligence and mine tremendous amounts of data to help get whatever answer they're looking for, or be able to, manipulate information to help solutions. How is the Institute looking at AI, and are you, and what are you doing with it?
Absolutely. Yes, we are. We are already using AI in one of our products, our National Fire Operations Reporting System. So we connect directly with computer-aided dispatch systems so that we're doing data capture. As I mentioned, part of our mission is trying to reduce firefighter data entry burden, because again, it's not often quality information, and they simply don't like doing it. So we want to do better using technology and things like AI. And so we are able to, in our Inforce, we call it, tool, once we capture that data, we are using AI to mine it and then generate automatic incident reports that are incredibly informative. In other words, we take all of the data that's there, we mine it, then we compare it using some algorithms against some benchmarks that the department says they want to meet. For example, having an engine arrive on every call within 4 minutes travel time, making sure that the first due unit that should have been first due to that particular call was in fact dispatched there first due. Turnout times for your crews. Are they getting on the rigs and getting out the door as quickly as you'd like them to? So these are all benchmarks that we are able to mine that computer-aided dispatch data immediately using AI and formulate this really detailed incident report with no firefighter data entry. And so that's one of the ways that we're using AI. We will continue to do this. We're building some predictive analytic models now that will help local fire departments with what we call move-ups. In other words, if you have a major event, then we never send one fire engine or truck or apparatus to anything, right? It's always a multiple unit response. And so if you have a major event like a high-rise fire, and you have multiple engines, multiple ladder trucks, ambulances, all assimilating on the scene, once they are there and they're working, what's happening to the rest of your remaining jurisdiction, right? While they're all working there, you have fewer resources remaining, right, to respond to subsequent emergency calls. So how do you handle that? Can you leave the resources that weren't sent in their base stations? Or for better coverage, shall we move things and strategically locate them so that they are located for a good, fast response to that subsequent call? What happens while that high-rise fire is in progress? So we're using some predictive analytic modeling to be able to advise departments. So it will look at what is remaining and how do you position them for a better response for that next call while that major event is ongoing. So that's another concept, right, of what we're building using our National Fire Operations Reporting System tool so that local departments have that kind of capability.
Well, that's amazing. This has really been enlightening, and you are certainly a tremendous addition. I wish we had even more award to give to you, but I congratulate you on your mission award from Homeland Security Today. And I just want to thank you on behalf of certainly all of us at HS Today, and I believe many, many people across the country, for all your work making the fire departments more efficient, being sure that our firefighters have what they need to respond appropriately and safely. And so thank you so much for your work and your example in data. So you're doing a tremendous job as the president of this Data Institute, and special thanks to you and all of your staff.
Oh, thank you, Christina. That means a great deal to me. I'm very honored to be associated in any way with your organization. So thank you.
You're terrific. Have a wonderful afternoon. And again, and take yourself out for a cocktail and send me the bill. So,
Thank you so much. It's so great to talk with you.
have a wonderful weekend.
You too.